Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I finished up this huge ranking of every Agatha Christie murderer and accomplice with the top 25. And these top 25 are spectacular characters, and I have to say, the ordering here, with a few notable exceptions, was actually relatively easy for me. I always knew who the top 10 or so would be, and I just had to order them. As always, there are spoilers ahead, but you can skip through the novels you don't want spoiled with the chapter titles in the video. And we're starting off the top tier here with an accomplice here at number 25, and that is Greta Anderson from Endless Night. In my last video, I mentioned there was another couple with a similar dynamic to Evie Howard and Alfred Inglethorpe, who I thought were superior, and that couple is Greta Anderson and Michael Rogers. Greta is the attendant to a rich woman who marries a man who doesn't actually love her, with the express purpose of murdering said rich woman to marry the companion, and the companion and the husband pretend to hate each other in the meanwhile. And I think Greta and Michael do it so much better than they do in Mysterious Affairs styles. But specifically talking about Greta, I find her a far more complex character. She is the one who comes up with the plan for Michael to marry Ellie and is instrumental in pulling it off. Now, I have Michael higher than Greta because I think what he does and the way he does it is crueler than what Greta does. And Greta is also somewhat in league with those other murderers who aren't necessarily in the novel as much as I would have wanted, but she is a fantastic accomplice and deserves her spot here at number 25. At number 24, we have a killer from a Miss Marple novel, Dr. Quimper from the 450 from Paddington. And I think what stands out the most for me about Dr. Quimper is Miss Marple's dismay over how he won't be hanged because he's such a horrible person. And Dr. Quimper strangles his wife and then dumps her body at Rutherford Hall. He then poisons nearly the entire Krakenthorpe family so he can bump off another brother, and then he later poisons Harold. And he does all of this for money. Now, you can debate whether or not he loves Emma, and that is an open question, but he does love money. So he murders his wife so he can marry Emma, and then kills off her brother so his share or her share of the inheritance will be larger. He's very wicked, and also he's able to use his career as a personal physician to take advantage. And when someone does that, that just ups the evil factor for me. Someone abusing their position of trust is one of the more nefarious things a murderer can do, in my opinion. And it's those little moments of him just acting shady and Miss Marple's opinion of him that propels him this high to number 24. At number 23 is a pretty big name here, and that is Dr. Shepard from The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And he is one of the biggest names for a Christie killer, largely because he is the narrator of the story, but that doesn't really factor into my decision to place him this high. I do love the way he sets out to be the one who causes Poirot's first failure, and he takes such great pride in not only that, but also in his murder plot. He treats it like a nice piece of art, and I always loved how he describes the scenes around him. He doesn't spare himself any negativity or tell his story in a way that spares him any like humiliation. He doesn't lie, and I think Dr. Shepard is a very nefarious person. He's a blackmailer, which Christie describes as worse than a murderer, and he murders his friend to cover up that blackmailing. And he also incriminates Ralph Patton, and he even drags in one of his patients into the plot. Without even lying to the reader, Dr. Shepard proves to be one of the most deceptive killers in a Christie novel, so he comes in at number 23. At number 22, we have a murderer with a very high body count, and that is Zachariah Osborne from The Pale Horse. It's not really known how many people Dr. Osborne either killed or played a significant role in killing. It might actually be higher than Lombard, who has the highest known number of victims. And this plot is one of the greediest and really the most evil in a Christie novel. Osborne is essentially the mastermind behind this murder for hire plot where people come to a lawyer fellow and bet that a certain person will die, and then Osborne makes it happen. He sends out these survey people to find out what toiletries the intended victim uses and replaces them with thallium poisoning. And I guess we can assume Dr. Osborne does this himself, although it's not really spelled out. But this is really truly evil genius level here, and very nefarious as well. He also murders a priest, which just goes to show how awful of a human being he is. And I will say his one minor flaw for me is that he is very sloppy in the way he incriminates Venables, not realizing he's in a wheelchair, and then he has no real choice but to stick with his guns at that point. But he's one of the worst people in a Christie novel, so he comes in at number 22. Number 21 is the highest ranked accomplice left on the board, at least the highest ranked accomplice who didn't murder anyone, and that is Christine Redfern from Evil Under the Sun. And of all of Christie's murdering duos, I think that the Redferns come across as the most equal. I think they are both on the same level ground here. I don't think one is the mastermind over the other, and that just adds to their characters. They are presented as the cheating husband and the jealous, angry wife, but they are actually madly in love with each other and operate their murders as one. Now, Patrick does do the killing, so that places him above Christine, but Christine might just actually be the more wicked one. The way she handles Linda, a self conscious teenager, is just truly awful. I mean, she uses Linda as an alibi, tricks her into thinking it's later than it really is, and then basically manipulates Linda into committing suicide and taking the blame for Arlena's death. And never mind the previous murders Christine and Patrick have committed before the novel. And if I didn't start weeding out the non murderers at this part of the list, I would put Christine probably even higher than I have her right now. But I do think those top, 20 spots or so should be for actual killers. So I left Christine Redfern here at number 21. Number 20 is the highest ranked person on the board here who didn't physically commit a murder, but he's also not an accomplice, and that is Stephen Norton, or X, from Curtain. And Norton's ability to manipulate others into committing murder, just like Iago and Othello, is truly a grand ability. And the fact that he uses this ability for evil instead of good is almost super villainy. And he's very convincing in the way he uses just a few choice words to prey upon really who are the most weak at heart or those who are most desperate. Someone like a Barbara Franklin or even like a Hastings. But his greatest crime is turning Poirot into a murderer. It's like the devil's greatest trick here. And we don't know this from the book, but the adaptation makes it very clear, and I'm willing to believe it's true in the novel as well, that Norton very much enjoyed this. I think there is a distinct possibility that Norton could be the most evil of all of Christie's culprits, but again, I do think those top spots should go towards actual killers. I think there's an argument for someone to disagree with that, especially with Norton. Someone might find the manipulation to be even worse than an actual killer. And he's also the perfect foil to send Poirot off in the book, so I have Norton here at number 20. Number 19, someone who I'm a little surprised I put this high, and that is Dr. Roberts from Cards on the Table. My initial thoughts of Dr. Roberts was that he was slightly above average, but when I really thought about it, I realized he's one of Christie's smartest and boldest killers. He stabs Mr. Shaitana in front of three other people to cover up his previous murder of the Craddocks, whom he kills in a really brutal way by infecting them with a virus. Of course, he uses his position as a physician to commit these murders, and I found his willingness to commit such a gutsy murder to justify this high position on the list. And he's very ruthless as well. He later murders Mrs. Lorimer, which I think leads to his downfall. His actions towards the end of the book are very questionable to me, and he does start a small tier here of these like top tier murderers who made avoidable mistakes, but also mistakes that I was willing to overlook because of how good they are otherwise. So Dr. Roberts comes in here at number 19. Number 18 is a character of a very common archetype, but Christie rarely uses this person for her murderer, and that is Norman Gale from Death in the Clouds. And Norman is this young, somewhat roguish fellow who isn't outright a bad person, at least the way he's initially presented to us, but also someone who's a very flawed human being. And I really like how Christie wrote Norman Gale. His romance with Jane is real. I love that moment when we're told that Norman gave up his winnings to Jane because she lost all of her money on the roulette wheel and he won, but he tells her, "Oh no, you actually won." And you can see there really are two personas here, and I believe Norman Gale's generosity and kindness is genuine, but he is also a very wicked killer as well. He murders Madame Giselle and Anne Marisol, his wife, nonetheless, to claim all of that money, and he murders Madame Giselle in a plane full of people and then frames Lady Horbury. And framing someone is also a pretty big boost for a killer, in my opinion. And also, probably most telling for me is how good he is at Poirot's fake blackmailing scheme, really demonstrating just how nefarious of a person he is. Now, I will say a knock for me is that he probably makes one of the worst mistakes a killer could, and that he falls into Poirot's pretty basic trap here, where he admits he wore gloves so he couldn't have left any fingerprints on the dart, and that is just such a basic mistake to make. It was totally unavoidable, totally avoidable, and he should have known better. So Norman Gale comes in here at number 18. At number 17 is the other culprit from Evil Under the Sun, and that is Patrick Redfern. And like I said with Christine, I think Patrick isn't equal to his wife, but what puts him above his wife is more than just the fact that he killed Arlena. He's the one luring Arlena to trust him. He's the one extorting the money from her. He's the one who leads Miss Brewster around the island to find the fake body. He murders Arlena by strangling her with his bare hands, which I would consider to be one of the more brutal ways to kill someone, probably second after like the hydrochloric acid incident we saw in Murder in Mesopotamia, and also probably even worse in other non-Christie novels. And I also have to factor in that this isn't the first plot of his he committed. They've murdered at least one other woman in a very similar manner, and Patrick Redford is very close to being a mastermind serial killer in this regard. And let's not forget that he tries to murder Poirot as well at the end of the book, and there is something really unredeemable and evil about Patrick Redfern, but also something quite alluring about him. So I placed him at number 17. At number 16, another murderer in a romantic duo, and that is Anne Prothero from Murder at the Vicarage. And this one was a tough one for me. I did contemplate putting her lower on the list, but I left her this high for a few reasons. And one is that she is the first killer in a Miss Marple novel, and she does try to use Miss Marple as part of her plot. There's that scene where she parades around in front of Miss Marple wearing a tight dress and doesn't have her purse with her to show she couldn't possibly have a gun on her. But that is just exactly what alerts Miss Marple to her. She takes the risk by not only incriminating herself when she is in fact guilty, but also by shooting her husband herself. The common wisdom in St. Marymead is that Lawrence would have been the one of the duo to shoot Colonel Prothero, and I think Anne Prothero is probably not as ruthless as some of the murderers directly below her. I don't think she would kill just anyone she had to. I think she only kills Colonel Prothero, although there is that plan to murder Dawes at the end of the book, which, to be honest, I often forget about, and it's not that good. But I think the more was Lawrence Redding's doing than Anne Prothero, but Anne Prothero is also a very iconic murderer in the canon. I mean, she instantly comes to mind when I think of Christie killers, specifically when I think of Miss Marple novel killers. So I placed her at number 16. Number 15 is a murderer from a novel that I am not very high on, and that is Dr. Kennedy from Sleeping Murder. And Sleeping Murder is far from my favorite Christie novel, but Dr. Kennedy is one of my favorite killers. This nice, quiet country doctor turns out to be quite the sinister and nasty force of evil. He's very subtle and eerie in in his depiction. I just keep thinking about that housekeeper story about how someone was like lurking around in the middle of the night, and the way he treats Ellen is truly awful. And he cuts up the tennis net so she can't entertain because he's jealous and he wants her all to himself, which, in and of itself is creepy because this is his sister or his half sister or whatever. And he strangles Helen. Again, very brutal murder, and then like waxes poetically about it. He's so calm and so polite. It just gets like creepily under your skin. And he gets away with this murder for a long time. And he's only caught by the extreme misfortune of Gwenda returning home, really by chance. And he also has to kill Lily the maid, which he does in like an equally brutal fashion. And I think his worst deed is the way he treats Major Halliday. Not only does Dr. Kennedy manipulate him into thinking he killed Helen, but he also like literally drives him to the point of insanity and suicide. Absolutely cruel. So he comes in here at number 15. Number 14, we have the first member of a duo in a row here, and that is Mark Gaskell from The Body in the Library. And I did contemplate over putting him lower on the list, as I do think Josie was the one who was the brains of the operation, but Mark was definitely active in the plan as well. He is the one who puts himself at risk by murdering Pamela. He doesn't actually murder Ruby, but I think the murder of Pamela Reeves is probably even the wickeder plot of the two here. And really one of the worst plots in a Christie novel, where he lures this young girl and tricks her into thinking she could be an actress, and she's just simply too young to realize what's happening. She's so excited, and then they kill her. I always found it very cruel the way Mark and Josie gussy her up and make Pamela feel like she's this big movie star, only for Mark to strangle her after drugging her and driving him up to Basil Blake's house. And the framing of Basil Blake in the subsequent attempted murder of Conway Jefferson just furthers my opinion of Mark Gaskell. He's clearly a garbage person, greedy and ruthless, so I put him at number 14. At number 13, as I just said, it's his accomplice, Josie Turner, from The Body in the Library. And to me, these two were very close, but I put Josie above Mark for the specific reason that Ruby was her cousin, so the betrayal there was more devious. I also thought that Josie was probably more active in the formation of the plan, although we don't really know that for sure. And Josie is the one who murders Ruby and then burns the body in the stolen car. But pretty terrible there. And she's also the one who leads Pamela to the hotel. We're told it was a woman who did this. So she's also the one who takes the responsibility for identifying Pamela as Ruby and really is the one who's doing all the lying to the police. I think she's just far more deceptive than Mark Gaskell, who just seems very skeevy and obviously a killer to begin with. So I think Josie has to be above Mark here at number 13. At number 12 is the highest ranked killer from a Tommy and Tuppence novel, and that is Mrs. Lancaster from By the Pricking of My Thumbs. And her character is just so spooky in those opening scenes where she asks Tuppence about if that was her child in the fireplace. And these are some of the best scenes in any Christie novel, and it all works because of Mrs. Lancaster. She's spooky, and there's something a bit sinister about her mannerisms as well. Now, if I'm being honest, I'm not a fan of her crime here of murdering children for really no reason. And there's also this mental health aspect of her personality as well that one would think I would place her much lower because I've been open about how much I just don't like those kinds of things. But I had to place Mrs. Lancaster this high. I mean, she's such a fantastic character. I want to recognize that. And I will say, I think her depiction is probably better in like the mental health aspect as it is compared to like Honoria Wanfleet or someone like that. So I put Mrs. Lancaster here at number 12. At number 11, the killer who fell just short of the top 10 but deserves her due here is Jackie de Belfort from Death on the Nile. And with Jackie and the last killer I talked about, I did let my rules slip a bit here. Jackie is just so iconic that I couldn't place her any lower. She is such a complex figure. You can feel her love for Simon is genuine. I really do believe she'd let Lynette have him if that's what Simon wanted. I love the way she ropes in Poirot and tricks him into thinking someone overheard their conversation. She also tricks Rosalie Otterburn later on into becoming her friend and then dumping the pistol on her. Now, I do have some issues with Jackie. First off, her plan, while genius, and I give her a lot of credit for it, was just simply the wrong plan for Simon and her. I mean, Simon bungled the whole thing, and she should have known better than to let him do all the running around and whatnot. And she's also very sloppy. I mean, she's seen murdering Louise in the cabin. There are a lot of flaws in her plan, so I couldn't put her into the top 10, but I also love her vindictiveness. I love at the end where she confesses to Poirot that, yeah, she didn't really want to murder Lynette, but didn't care either because Lynette did try to steal Simon. And it's that last little twist of the knife that gives me the confidence to say, yeah, Jackie is a terrible person and deserves to be this high, so I placed her at number 11. At number 10, and I will admit, I thought this person was going to wind up even higher, but the competition was very stiff. So here I have the highest ranked of these elderly slash middle-aged spinster killers, Miss Gilchrist from After the Funeral. And one of my favorite scenes in a Christie novel is the end of this book where Miss Gilchrist is unmasked and starts rattling off about her tea shop after tea shop after tea shop. Of all the Christie's murderers, when that mask comes off, it comes off the hardest on Miss Gilchrist. This gentle country spinster who loves tea shops and art brutally murdered her companion with a hatchet and convinced her family that Richard Abernathy was murdered and gets them to turn on each other. It's just absolutely brutal. And she did all of this for a painting not worth that much money. She goes such a long way into figuring out Miss Gilchrist's persona as this woman who is so desperate and beaten down by life, she will murder for a sum of money to revive her tea shop, no matter how small money that is. As Poirot puts it, it's all very ladylike. And Miss Gilchrist is one of the most delightful characters in a Christie work. Never mind murderer. I love her insistence that she isn't a servant and she doesn't do the rough work. I love her, but the reason why I didn't put her higher is because I do think the top nine are just outright evil, where I think Miss Gilchrist probably isn't so evil as all of that. So I have her at number 10. But number 9 is the highest ranked killer on this list who isn't the big bad villain, so to speak, of the work, and that is Vera Claythorne from And Then There Were None. And unlike most of her fellow guests, Vera does actually commit a murder during the course of the book. She shoots Lombard dead in a moment of insanity, I guess. I won't say, but I think it reveals her very true nature, a very murderous one. And Christie writes Vera in such a way that the reader almost feels sympathetic toward her. She's one of the most affected by the poem. She's the one having the hardest time dealing with the situation on the island, and you really feel for her because she is struggling. And then you learn the reason why Wargrave saves her for last is because she's a garbage person and deserves this treatment. Now, she's not emotionally strong, but when you really read the novel closely, her instability and guilt does not come from the fact that she let Cyril drown. She really doesn't regret that specific action. What she does regret is that she didn't get what she wanted out of it. Hugo knows that what Vera did and essentially dumps her to become an alcoholic. She doesn't get the man, she doesn't get the money, and she's forced to take menial jobs because no one will hire a woman who let a child drown, even though, like, the public story is that was an accident. I think Vera Claythorne is a top notch killer, a total trash of a human being, and one of the worst here, so I placed her at number 9. At number 8 is the other killer from Endless Night, Michael Rogers. And Michael Rogers is a fascinating combination of like Alfred Inglethorpe, Simon Doyle, and Dr. Shepard, but better than all of them. His murder plot is essentially the same as Simon's. He marries a wealthy heiress so he can murder her, inherit her money, and then marry the woman he loves. Like Inglethorpe, Michael pretends to hate his actual lover, who is a companion to his wife. And like Dr. Shepard, he is the narrator of the story and he's better than all of them. His depiction as a working class man is truly unique in Christie. I can't think of a single other major character who is a working class hero but not a servant of Christie's to this extent. The beginning half or so of Endless Night is just littered with these great character moments for Michael. His love and passion for Ellie seems so real that it's one of the most shocking reveals at the end that he killed her. He is up there as one, if not one of the most shocking killer reveals in a Christie book. But that's not where his story ends. He's already killed 3 people by this point, and then strangles Greta because he tells her he actually really loved Ellie, and now he hates Greta. And then we go back and we learn that Michael Rogers has always been a pretty bad seed. Those earlier scenes with Michael's mother and him not wanting to introduce Ellie to her are so good. His strained relationship with her isn't because of her, it's because of him. And he doesn't want to bring Ellie to meet her, so his mother can't warn Ellie about Michael. He doesn't have any embarrassment or of his mother that he doesn't want Ellie to know. It's he doesn't want his mother to tell Ellie to like get away from him. And then we have all that stuff with Santini, the architect, and his dying words about how he should have gone in the other way. I mean, Michael Rogers just one of Christie's most ruthless killers, but also one of the best written as well. So he comes in at number 8. Number 7 is the highest ranked killer from a Miss Marple novel, and that is Lancelot Fortescue from A Pocket Full of Rye. And again, we have a roguish young male who pretends to fall in love with someone else, but only Lancelot is so easily able to take advantage of Gladys and trick her into murdering his father. Now, granted, I think Gladys is the kind of person most people could manipulate into doing just really dumb things, but Lancelot takes it up to 11 here. He also murders Gladys so she can't blab, and he also kills his stepmother, so the inheritance immediately goes to him and his siblings. I always found Lancelot to be a rather nasty murderer. I love the comments Miss Marple makes about how he put the clothespin on Gladys's nose, which just goes to show how awful he is. And Miss Marple's angrier about the clothespin than she is about Gladys being murdered. And the ending scene is one of the best in all of Christie, where Miss Marple receives the photograph of Gladys and Lancelot. It's just such a fitting and ironic end for him to be brought down by the very girl he murdered and disrespected. Lancelot Fortescue is one of the worst killers in a Christie novel, so I placed him here at number 7. Number 6, another one of those murderers who undergo quite the shift in personality once they are revealed, and that is Neville Strange from Toward Zero. And Neville's murder plot is truly a wicked creation. He murders quite brutally his ward, Miss Tressilian, for no reason other than to frame his ex wife Audrey so she will be hanged. And he does this in a manner that makes it look like Audrey tried to frame him. This is truly a devious concoction, and he puts in so much effort to this. Other than maybe like one or two others, I think Neville put more work into his plot than any other Christie killer. He also murdered Mr. Treves in a way that I'm not totally convinced, and that is a knock against him. But to be honest, I didn't really hold it that much against him because of just how good everything else is about him. And I also mentioned Miss Gilchrist had the hardest fall when the mask came off, but Neville Strange is also a contender for that. Neville is a famous tennis player known for his calm demeanor, but that is just a mask hiding a very angry man. And when he's exposed, he absolutely loses control of himself, and it's such a great scene. I didn't even mention how he murdered Audrey's past lover because he couldn't stand to see her with someone else. And then we learned that not only has Neville always been a garbage person as a child, he has just always been this controlling force, which is why Audrey left him to begin with. He didn't leave her, as we're led to believe. She left him. And there are just so many fascinating layers to Neville Strange, who comes in here at number 6. Now, number 5 is a murderer I really wanted to put even higher, but there's just no space to do so. And that is David Hunter from Taken at the Flood. And this is sort of a strange case because David is not a murderer for the majority of this book. He only murders the fake Rosaline toward the very end of the novel. But what makes David so great to me is that he perfectly embodies the spirit of the novel that you should take the opportunity, whatever it is, when it arises. He doesn't blow up the clothes home that kills most of the people, but he's able to swoop in and convince Eileen to pretend to be Rosaline to claim her fortune. He's very controlling and doesn't allow her to give away any of the money. He's also very good on his feet. I think he's probably the best Christie murderer in terms of being able to adapt to the situation and think quickly on his feet. He's very good in convincing Lynn that he was in London when he wasn't, and all of this is character based because he hasn't even committed a murder yet. And I will concede that the murder of Rosaline isn't like the most riveting in the book or the best plan, but he just still does do a very good job in making it work and making it look like a suicide and even framing Jeremy in the process. I think David Hunter is one of the more sinister killers out there, but there are four better, so he does finish here at number 5. At number 4, just off the podium, is Elsa Greer or Lady Didisham from Five Little Pigs. And Elsa was tough to place. I love the concept of Amyas painting his killer as he's dying and him coming to the realization of what happened. And Elsa is so smug and so vindictive about it. She is shamelessly having an affair with Amyas in front of Caroline. But she's also very naive, and I find this to be a plus in her character. She doesn't realize she's just another mistress Amyas is only interested in painting, and if she were more mature, she would have realized that murdering Amyas is not going to result in her own happiness. Now, I still think she is a very ruthless murderer. She lets Carolyn take the fall for it, and she gets away with it. Not only at the time of the murder, but in the present day. She is not arrested for this murder, but she becomes an empty husk of a woman who has no feeling whatsoever. Her life is and has long been over. She didn't get what she wanted out of her crime, and to the contrary, she gets the exact opposite, and that is Amyas and Caroline still together in death. And I find Elsa Greer to be the most complex Christie killer in terms of character. And while I can admit her plan wasn't like the most ingenious or the most clever or the most brutal, but it is arguably the most successful, and she deserves her spot at the top of the list here at number 4. Number 3, here we have back to back murderesses who are very similar. And it was just a matter of one slightly edging out the other. But here at number 3, I have Nick Buckley from Peril at End House. And what I love about Nick is that she ropes in Poirot into her plans. It is so devious, and she has him wrapped around her little finger. She completely pulls the wool over his eyes. I also think she's the most successful perpetrator of the killer was the apparent intended victim trope Christie uses a lot. She pulls off, very credibly I might add, an absolutely insane murder plot. She tricks Poirot into having her bring Maggie down to visit when she had already planned such, and she's able to successfully convince everyone that she was Michael Seaton's fiancée and not Maggie. It truly is unbelievable that she could pull this off, but Christie writes it so wonderfully that the incredible becomes the credible, and she sets up this plot by convincing everyone she is the intended victim. There are so many Christie killers and other killers created by other authors who do this kind of thing, and quite frankly, it's very easy to see through. Now, Nick is the best version of this person. I do think she is helped by the fact that we don't actually see a lot of those murder attempts allegedly on her life, but nonetheless, it is very good. And Nick's true nature is on display the entire time. I mean, Freddy tells Poirot right away that Nick is a liar and a terrible person, but it's just brushed off by him and the reader. And like David Hunter, I think Nick has a lot of fun committing her crimes. I mean, she really seems to get a kick out of it. That and also like the subsequent seance at the end. And even when Poirot figures out her betrayal and exposes her, he takes it very personally. I mean, he is very hurt here, and she still has the hold on him. He gives her the opportunity to avoid the gallows and take her own life, which she presumably does. I mean, Nick Buckley's hold over Poirot alone was enough to have her here at number 3. Number 2, as I just referred to, a similar character and the highest ranked killer from a Poirot novel, Jane Wilkinson from Lord Edgware Dies. And like the previous killer, Jane Wilkinson also has a hold over Poirot. He's entirely sucked in by her charm and her story. I think she's more wicked than Nick Buckley, which is why I have her above her. Her actions overall just seem more sinister. Her murder of Lord Edgware is fairly brazen to begin with, where she announces herself at the house and then stabs him. She uses Carlotta Adams to establish her alibi and then does away with her. I think Jane Wilkinson is a very quick thinker as well. I mean, she takes advantage of Carlotta's letter to her sister by ripping off the S and turning she into he. She also acts quickly when she murders Donald Ross, but I will say I think that exposes a flaw in her plan. I mean, she completely botches the other dinner party where she doesn't know who the mythological Paris is, but she's able to recover from that pretty well. So that's why I don't really hold that too much against her, and she more or less gets away with her crimes for quite a bit. I mean, Poirot only solves it because of a chance remark, otherwise, she probably does get away with it. And I've said this a lot in this video, but one of my favorite passages in a Christie novel is the ending of this book where Jane Wilkinson writes to Poirot, excited about being hanged because she might find herself as a wax sculptor in Madame Tussaud and continue to seek the publicity she craves. I mean, Jane Wilkinson, just an all time great murderer here at number 2. And now for the top spot. At number 1 is the main murderer from Christie's biggest novel, and that is Justice Lawrence Wargrave from And Then There Were None. And Wargrave has a very depraved mind. I mean, just to think of this plot is you really, have to be a sociopath. In his own words, which I'm not sure we can always believe the words in his confessional, but I do believe this is that he has always had the desire to kill, and this influenced his decision to become a judge, as he enjoyed watching condemned prisoners hang. Not only that, he enjoyed watching them squirm in the dock and their face when he condemned them. I wouldn't trust his words when he says Seton was guilty, and either way, Wargrave essentially broke the law by condemning him. As a man of the law, Wargrave has very little respect for it, and he simply dispatches with it when it becomes inconvenient to him. Point of the law in criminal proceedings is to make sure the defendants have a fair trial, something he does not afford his victims on the island. He takes the law into his own hands, but to murder people whom he believes committed murder in the past and got away with it. And we only really have Wargrave's word that those 9 people plus Isaac Morris are guilty. Now, some of them are very clearly guilty as they admit it, but Wargrave's extrajudicial actions is just one of the things that propel him to the top of the list. I always found him an interesting character to study. There are other Christie killers who enjoyed murdering people, but they had other main motivations. Wargrave's main motivation is simply his desire to murder people, and Wargrave is able to pull this grand scheme in more or less a flawless manner. I can believe he knew his victims well enough to accurately predict their actions and be able to prey upon them and adapt to the situation when he needed to. He is able to win over Armstrong pretty easily and use the doctor for his own purposes. Wargrave is able to use Armstrong to divert suspicion away from himself. Lombard immediately thinks Wargrave is the guilty party here, but the judge is able to get around that. And Wargrave knew his victims more than any other Christie killer knew their victims. His desire to commit murder for the fun of it, his intelligence, his ruthlessness, and his willingness to take risks leaves me no choice but to put the judge here at number 1. And that is it for this video, and that is it for this incredibly long list. It was a fun, though very difficult exercise for me. Now, for other authors, I would probably do a like top 10 killers list rather than ranking every single one of them. I also may want to rank victims from all of these authors, but again, I'd probably do like a top 10 or a top 15 rather than doing every single victim, and that would just be way too many people. Next, however, I will be covering some theories about Christie books, and what I mean by that is I will try to explain some open ended questions that exist in some of them, so stay tuned for that. And make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, Mystery Files.